I have seen so many former Democrats become Republicans to vote against this issue because the Democrats, they vote along party lines every time when it comes to these issues. There are very few Democrats speaking out against this right now. I think in the coming years, there's going to be more, but right now, they're so afraid to take a stand against this, and I don't know why.
Ready, set, showtime. Welcome to the Montana Majority Report. Quick, transparent, and informative. Get the inside scoop on policies, people, and decisions shaping our state, all in less time than it takes to pour your morning coffee. Stay tuned. Montana starts right here.
Good afternoon. I'm Senator John Fuller from Senate District 4, which is Kalispell, and welcome to the Senate Majority Report, our weekly broadcast here informing the voters of Montana. Today we're going to discuss a couple of issues that are hot button issues. And just before we begin, for those who object to my emphasis on addressing some cultural issues, full disclosure, I'm a real believer in Andrew Breitbart's philosophy that all politics is downstream from culture. And when the cultural war is lost, so is the society lose whatever political efforts that they try to get. And first, a little bit about me. I spent 45 years teaching high school students government, economics, history, etc. And I retired in 2009, worked for a period of time as a congressional field director for Montana's Western representative, the only representative at the time in the United States Congress, and then was prevailed upon to run for the legislature in 2018. And since my students and their parents decided that I hadn't been punished enough, they elected me. So consequently, I have been in the legislature since 2019, and in 2022, I was elevated to the Senate, if that's an elevation. Some people claim it's because that I needed more naps. Anyway, what we're here to talk about is my efforts to protect the people of Montana, especially the children of Montana, who have been my life's work, from the transgender contagion. And in 2019, my first session in the legislature, I introduced a bill to ban transgender, quote, transgender therapy, end quote. And it died in the House. In 2021, I got a similar bill that passed the House and died in the Senate. And in 2023, Senate Bill 99, I introduced in the Senate, which banned transgender therapy for children. And it passed, and it passed both houses. It was signed by the governor, but was declared unconstitutional by the Montana State Supreme Court just recently. So I got to thinking, in my efforts to protect children, I decided, working closely with the Montana Family Foundation, who will introduce its chief legal counsel here in a minute, we came up with another strategy. And that strategy was incorporated within Senate Bill 164 and Senate Bill 218 in the current legislature that have both passed the Senate and were now just recently heard before the House Judiciary Committee, and I hope that they become law. What Senate Bill 164 does is it is a simple amendment to the child abuse statutes, defining child abuse as now including transgender therapy, quote unquote, on children. And Senate Bill 218, which was at the guidance of the Montana Family Foundation, and I have to give them full credit for the what is included within it, is to provide a private right of action for someone who is been victimized by this, and then years or or sometime later discovers that this highly risk experimental surgeries and treatment was damaging to them and they deserve justice. And so with that, I want to introduce Derek Oestreicher from Montana Family Foundation, and he will introduce our two magnificent proponent and guests that came to testify as proponents in today's testimony.
Well, thanks for the introduction, John. And you talked about the culture war, being on the front lines of the culture war. That's what the Montana Family Foundation does. We pretty much camp out in Senate and House Judiciary committees all session long. And these are the types of bills and issues that we engage on. And I know it's near and dear to your heart to protect children. And that's what both of these bills do. Senate Bill 164 would criminalize providing these surgical interventions, gender interventions to kids. We have emerging studies and data that's coming out that it's harmful to children, dangerous, inherently dangerous. And same with Senate Bill 218, which was recently heard in the House Judiciary Committee. Because we know there's a myriad of harms that are caused by these procedures to both children and adults, some people do not regret going through these transitions, but there are a growing number of folks who do regret that and who have been harmed, seriously harmed, in life-altering ways that are irreversible. And Senate Bill 218 is simply a mechanism to provide them with an avenue for justice. And it's so desperately needed. And so with that, when our two guests got word of this crucial legislation, they were so excited. I was so excited to have them come out, and they were so excited to come out and share their story with the committee and with the state of Montana. So we have Jamie Reed and Elle Palmer. And I'll let you, Jamie, introduce yourself. And Elle, of course, introduce yourself as well. But you guys traveled here to Montana to share your story of why these procedures, these interventions really are so dangerous to not only minors, but anyone who's receiving them. So Jamie, please.
So much, and thank you so much for this crucial legislation. We so believe that this is the best pathway forward for people to seek justice. So I am a whistleblower from a pediatric transgender center where I started working in 2018. I was there from 2018 to 2023, and I became a public whistleblower after seeing years of these interventions simply harm patients, harm their families. We were tearing apart families. And these were harms not just on these kids' mental health, but actual physical damage being done to children in the name of medicine within a children's hospital. I became a public whistleblower by going to my state's attorney general. I filed a formal affidavit, and within 6 months, my state actually stopped all of these interventions. Wow. So we were no longer and are no longer doing puberty blockade, cross-sex hormones, or surgeries in the state of Missouri. We included a grandfather clause with a very similar private right of action. So these patients could have remained on these treatments if the doctors who were prescribing them would simply be willing to take on the responsibility of the long-term repercussions of giving them. And when these doctors in these hospitals looked at the long-term harms, they recognized that these are not efficacious and they hurt people. Wow. And so they didn't even utilize the grandfather clause simply because when we added that medical malpractice, that private right of action, they could not stand up for what they were doing, which means that they shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. And so as soon as I heard about your legislation here in Montana, I knew that this is legislation that myself and my organization wanted to support. I also speak for a number of LGB adults and detransitioners and desisters and parents. And we are essentially traveling the country right now trying to see true medical neglect and harms and damage be held accountable for those who have been doing it, and to stop this and to stop these practices.
Yes. Well, your story is compelling, and Elle, for years we've heard in these committee hearings that these transition procedures, these interventions, they're not happening on Montana kids. It doesn't happen here in Montana. That's a California problem. That's a New York problem. It's not happening here. But Elle, your story proves that that was a lie. Yeah, can you introduce yourself? And you're a Great Falls, Montana native, and your story is so beautiful and compelling. So please share.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Fuller, for introducing this. And thank you, Derek, for inviting me to come testify. And thank you, Jamie, for your courage. You're amazing. You always give amazing testimony. I am so excited to be here with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Elle Palmer. Like Derek said, I am a Great Falls native, born and raised. And I spent the first 19 years of my life in Great Falls, and then I spent the next 4 years in Missoula. So I lived here throughout my entire gender transition and the beginning of my detransition as well. So when I was 15, I came out as a trans boy, which was back in 2015, 10 years ago. And I began testosterone at Planned Parenthood when I was 16. My parents had to sign the paperwork because I was a minor, but back then there was very little information on transgender gender transitions, especially for kids. There still isn't a lot of information even 10 years later, but back then the protocol was basically, my parents just listened to the doctors. And so I went into Planned Parenthood with my parents. I talked to a doctor there. The doctor referred me to 6 months of therapy, and the therapist that I ended up going to was the head of the LGBT Center in Great Falls. My first appointment with her, she affirmed that I was really a trans boy because of the way that my eyes lit up when I talked about being a boy. Despite my extensive history of mental health issues, sexual abuse, and dropping out of school and having no friends in real life, I was quickly put through the medical pipeline as a minor to begin testosterone when I was 16. Because of the doctors and therapists that I interacted with, encouraging this quick transition, my parents basically gave in and just listened. So I took testosterone for 3 years from age 16 to 19. And then in my first week of college at the University of Montana, I started detransitioning. I came off of testosterone and started to unpack the ideology that I had learned over the course of my entire teenage years. It's been 6 years since I stopped testosterone. I'm 25 now, and I've been detransitioned now at this point twice as long as I spent transitioning, but there are permanent lifelong side effects from taking testosterone, and there are things that, are going to affect me that I don't even know about yet, I'm sure. So this bill, as soon as I heard about it, I was very excited because people online are talking about this as the first detransitioner Bill of Rights in the country. And because I was one of the first public detransitioners to speak out in my generation, being from Montana and having Montana introducing this legislation first, it means a lot to me. And I think it's a good way to come full circle and wrap up, my gender transition and detransition. So I'm very happy that I got to come testify today.
Well, we are most grateful for your proponent testimony today. We thank you, and I'm in admiration of your courage to step forward and speak, because the first, as we saw what happened in the committee room, the advocates for transgender agenda are notoriously aggressive and shall we say, at least impolite. But
That's one way of putting it, John.
yeah, well, I am in politics, and I'm supposed to be less blunt than I could be as a teacher. So that being the case, your story, you had numerous accounts of attempts at intimidation, and I am in awe of your courage and to go to the Attorney General. Would you tell a little about how you finally had to resort to that?
Yes, and I think part of this goes back to the basics of my medical training. I was trained in medical ethics, and I really listened when we were being told that every individual that works in a hospital, down to the nurse or to the front desk staff, has a responsibility to our patients and our families. And I would remember being told in trainings, if you're the nurse and you're scrubbing in to a surgery and the doctor comes in and they appear to be intoxicated or smell like alcohol, it is your responsibility, every single person in that hospital's responsibility, to step up, be brave, and stand up for patients. And so the longer that I was working in this center, the more and more ethical boundaries. I said once on a podcast, I would draw a line in the sand, an ethical line in the sand, and it would just get walked on over and over and over again. I was asking repeatedly for ethics consults, for our risk management from the hospital to come in and actually do an assessment of what we were doing. But what has been occurring nationwide is that this has exploded. We have seen an explosion of trans-identifying young people, primarily out of COVID. Some of this has to do with when we locked down and closed all of the schools and put all of these kids online and pretended like we were giving them a good education when they were stuck at home behind a screen. But we saw an explosion of patients, and these patients did not fit the original cohort of who I thought I was going to be seeing. They were really ill. They were not doing well. And then what I also started seeing the longer that I was there was that we were telling patients and families this was going to fix something, and all it was doing was hurting them. And so I tried every internal mechanism that I could to get the hospital to pay attention. And I tried a couple months to just let it go. I moved to a new position within the hospital. I tried to walk away. My family wanted me to walk away. Friends wanted me to walk away. And I just felt like I was leaving those kids unprotected. And I was leaving those families in harm's way, knowing that I had knowledge to stop it. And I just couldn't live with myself if I didn't do something. And so I went to my Republican Attorney General as a lifelong Democrat. Some very interesting first meetings with those legal staff, and we really worked through those issues. And what I also have come to believe is this is a bipartisan issue. There is nothing about politics when it comes to medical evidence, safeguarding kids, and standing up for what's right for our communities.
Well, you are obviously in need of more counseling because of your common sense when you say that it is bipartisan, because it has become a very partisan issue. Unfortunately, I was of the same belief as you back in 2019 when I introduced one of the very first bills in state legislatures throughout the state to protect kids from transgender, quote, therapy, end quote. And I soon discovered that it had nothing to do with common sense. It had nothing to do with bipartisan approaches. It had everything to do with some kind of agenda that the other side of the aisle was willing to stake their flag on.
Yep, it's the hill that the Democrats are willing to die on, and that strikes me in the heart as a lifelong Democrat.
What strikes me is how unusual, for instance, as a former history teacher, I would point out that American political parties have always been non-ideological. They are brawling coalitions of groups who they represent in an effort to gain political power.
Yes.
And if a political issue doesn't work for them, they abandon it like a hot potato. Like during the Clinton years, gun control was a big on the Democrats' agenda. It didn't work. It cost them all kinds of, lost them Congress. And you didn't hear anything else about gun control for the Democrats. And the issue, as you go back all throughout history, and our two-party system has worked when both political parties are willing to do what works for the majority of the American people.
Yes.
And this particular issue, for whatever reason, has become very divisive.
And also, our party system worked when we listened to our constituents. What the Democratic Party has right now is they've really tied us up with an agenda, which is ideologically based, which is a belief system of trans and queer that has nothing to do with supporting gays and lesbians. And what I'm actually finding is that I'm finding more Republicans are open and willing to speak and work with us around some basic common sense rules. Gays and lesbians should be able to have a job, contribute to society, take care of their family. As long as we recognize that your beliefs might intersect with ours in different ways, then we can get along great and we don't have to be harming kids.
Well, as the old history teacher, I would remind that the great Democrat president, John F. Kennedy, made a speech one time and it said, "We are all human. We all are mortal. We all have the same common desires to prosper and have a life of happiness, pursue happiness." And for the life of me, I have trouble when your pursuit of happiness is engaging in harmful activities to children.
Absolutely. And what I want to just reiterate is that is not the position of most gays and lesbians. We recognize that this harms kids. And the other thing that we recognize is that this is really regressive and really based on weird old stereotypes. We think that women can be astronauts and men can bake if they want to bake. Like, there's no way that we have to prescribe how kids need to grow up. And trans right now is hearkening back to some of the most regressive stereotypes we've ever seen. If a little boy wants to play with a Barbie doll, suddenly he needs to have his penis cut off. This is absurd and it makes absolutely no sense. It does not make any sense to common decency and values. And so that is why the Democrats, the gays and lesbians, all of us who recognize reality for reality, I'm willing to partner with anyone if we can move forward. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And right now, you are some of the greatest friends that we have because children, their health and safety comes first.
I have seen Democrats flip across the aisle because of this single issue.
Yes.
And I came from a leftist family. My entire family is still leftist. I was a leftist until I started to deprogram from the trans issues and doing deep dive research into where this is coming from, what other people in the community are believing and leaning into, and how in the past 5 years it's just been getting crazier. I have seen so many former Democrats become Republicans to vote against this issue because the Democrats, they vote along party lines every time when it comes to these issues. There are very few Democrats speaking out against this right now. I think in the coming years, there's going to be more, but right now, they're so afraid to take a stand against this, and I don't know why.
Well, I will go out on a limb here, and I will predict that there will be no Democrats in the House Judiciary Committee vote in favor of this bill, or either one of these bills. And when it reaches the floor, I will go out on another limb, a pretty stout limb, I might add, that there will be no Democrats that will break ranks and vote to protect children in Montana.
I'd put like $100 on that for sure.
You know, one of the most compelling questions on that point is, why would they stand in the way of a bill that simply provides access to justice for those who are harmed by the procedures?
Part of that is because when you open up a pathway of justice, what it does show and point out is that this is a house built on sand.
It's a chink in the armor.
Right. I mean, these doctors, many of them will not be able to say, oh, I am confident that this treatment is going to work for you 20 years from now. And that goes to show that in some ways, this should not be being done to anyone.
It's interesting that you say that. One of the opponents to the bills mentioned that implied consent is very, very definitive here, just like every other surgery where you sign. And of course, my point is that with children, by legal definition, they are not capable of consent. So doing anything such as this to children is a denial of their consent.
The reality of this, sorry, I just want to say really quick. The reality is that a 16-year-old like I was is making this decision with a 16-year-old brain. And there are adults who come and testify and they transitioned as adults. And they say, oh, I wish I'd been able to do this when I was a kid. They're making that assumption as an adult that they would have wanted that as a child as well. And like a 16-year-old cannot understand, cannot make an informed decision on whether they're going to be happy with this, you know, even just 3 years down the line, because being 16 and being 19, you have completely changed just before you're even out of your teenage years. And that's something that I don't know how people don't understand. You know, the teenage mind is so malleable.
I have a 4-year-old boy who thinks he's a dinosaur sometimes, but I'm not going to get him surgery for that.
But also, young people look to us to define reality.
Right. That's very true.
Your 4-year-old, my 7-year-old, my 3-year-old, they are asking us every day. I have my kids will still ask me, Mom, am I a girl or boy? Not because they're seriously questioning it, because we are who define the reality for them. Oh, you're a boy. You have he, him pronouns. And recently I've just started teaching them that you should hold the door for ladies.
Yes.
I think we need to get back to some basic decorum.
Going back to protecting children, you know, reality pays no attention to likes, dislikes, and emotions. And I think I'm quoting Ben Shapiro there, but I probably shouldn't do that. But he doesn't need the plug. But it doesn't. And so when I think you testified specifically, you said it is impossible to change your sex. Did you not say that?
I did, because it's absolutely true. And so
seemed like common sense to me.
It does. It is.
And I am so grateful for Derek and you to get the three of you to get those to come forth, and even remotely where there's no picture, it was tremendous. I could tell in their voice. Remember, old lesson: 93% of human communication is nonverbal, and you can tell by that they had real emotion, and they took their courage in their hands and went forth and said these things.
And what makes it so hard for them sometimes is that they are also having to publicly put on display one of the things that they might have the most shame, the most regret, the most. What the other side tells them is, this is your fault.
Yeah, all the time.
You did this to yourself.
Yeah.
And what I want to take apart from that is even that word regret. I don't know that you can regret when you have been completely lied to by a medical system.
Yeah, I don't even think of it that way.
You can be in mourning.
Yeah.
And what was challenging in that hearing was these individuals who have experienced some of the most profound harms that could be done to a human body. And there was snickering and laughing in the chamber. Yeah. And I hope when I try to, always assume good intent, I'm going to assume that snickering and laughter was out of their own discomfort and out of their own pain and their own fear. Oh my gosh, what have I maybe done to myself?
All I can think about when I see opponents testifying, saying, "I'm so happy, this saved my life," all I can think about is I would have gotten up there and said the same things as a teenager. Like, I really believed that transitioning cured me of all of my mental health issues, being suicidal, depressed, anxious, going back to school. In reality, growing older and developing more of a sense of self, starting to make friends, starting to accomplish things in my life, it's not because I was becoming a boy with testosterone. It's because I started becoming more comfortable as a person. And that breaks my heart. And the people who testified, the detransitioners who testified today, there are so many just heartbreaking stories and so much medical harm that you hear about. Like, for example, Prisha, who had a baby and then experienced trapped milk in her removed breasts because she had a mastectomy, and she had her nipples removed and replaced, and she had to go get surgery to fix that because she literally could not get that out any other way. And just like that kind of story, it's just hard to imagine how anybody can hear that and go, yeah, we should keep doing this. It's crazy.
It's really heartbreaking because, from my understanding, and talking with Walt Heyer, a detransitioner, he has sexchangeregret.com, and he's an advocate, and he reaches out to folks who are struggling with gender dysphoria and detransitioners, and in almost all cases, if not all cases, he can tie it to some sort of trauma.
Yes.
So these are individuals who have experienced some trauma in their life, most often in their childhood, and they've already been traumatized. And instead of finding a positive way to cope with that, they're almost disassociating from a version of themselves that they don't want to feel that trauma anymore, but they're traumatizing themselves all over again.
I can definitely speak on that. In my experience, from what I have seen from all of the detransitioners that I'm friends with, from all of the trans people that I have met throughout my life, I can say the common thread, I believe, between almost every single female transitioner is sexual abuse. And it's obvious, when you stop and think about it for 5 seconds, why a female would want to become a male if they have been sexually abused. You're getting away from the memory of being vulnerable, of being defenseless against, a more powerful man. And the fact is that is one of the only ways that they feel like they can take their power back and recover, by becoming a different person. And that's something that I experienced, is that when I became Luke, I basically got to just like put on a mask, put on a suit, and go, this is a fresh start. This is the beginning of a new life. And that's why, I was able to continue going to school and recover from my mental health issues, because I just decided I was going to be a new person. And I didn't want to hang on to any of that trauma that I had. And I wasn't really dealing with it. I was just putting it off. Yes. And later, when I detransitioned, I realized I hadn't dealt with any of that at all. And I had to go through the process of looking like a man, people thinking I'm a man transitioning to become a woman, on top of dealing with all of the trauma that I had repressed from my childhood. And it's a detransitioning is a harder process than transitioning, absolutely.
Well, all we can do now is pray that the House will pass these bills so that we can step forward and go forward and protect the lives of children particularly, but also anybody else suffering from these issues here in Montana, providing justice for them also. We're up against the hard stop here pretty quick. Time is man's greatest enemy. It makes us old, it gets us fat, old, ugly, and weak. With that, once again, from the depths of my heart, I thank you both for coming. Your evidence and testimony was powerful, extremely powerful, and only hearts of stone could resist what you had to say.